Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Brian Poole. I'm delighted to have you back in August. Hope your summer is going well. We are in our quarterly subcommittee meeting for the Rocky Mountain National Park Agricultural Subcommittee meeting. We have 2 hours today, as usual, with a busy agenda. My partner Kate here is on the line. We'll be taking notes. And there are some quick round of introductions. Just to go ahead and share, as usual, your name and organization in the chat. That'll be our record of attendance. So please take one moment to do that. And as you're doing that, I'll just review our or share our guiding principles here for you. Go ahead and take a minute here and drop your name and organization in the chat, as usual. And as a reminder of our guiding principles here, we're going to remain faithful to these as we've talked about each time we've met over the last year. We'll continue our collaboration. Particularly today, we'll focus on this number 2, evaluate, validate, and optimize our science-guided best management practices. We're going to spend the second half of our meeting on this as a second subcommittee meeting, our little working group around BMPs. So at that point, if you're not involved with that, you can go ahead and drop off. But we'll wait for the time for that to actually tick over, and I'll give you another reminder at that point. And we'll, number 3 here, remember we're promoting our BMPs. That will include the early warning system. So we've got Dr. Russ Schumacher on the line. We'll hope to get a quick update there, how that's working, and continue to make those investments and make sure that we've got the funding necessary to support that. And we have a couple guest speakers today that I'll start to walk through. So I did share the agenda ahead of time, but we'll walk through it real quickly here just so you're familiar. Jim, we'll go ahead and start with you when we're done here with the introductory section on the update on the contingency plan, and Christy, any updates or review of the data we have. Megan, I'll ask you to do a quick update on the plans for our October AQCC meeting. Maybe that's just 5 minutes. Zach and Dr. Schumacher, if you want at 11:35 about give us an update on the early warning system, as I mentioned. And I haven't seen yet if Dr. Sarah Place is here. Kate, can you check?
I am.
Oh, hi, welcome. Thank you so much. We'll try to get to you at 11:45. We got 15 minutes to discuss AgNext and the research being conducted there. I just got a note from Dr. Alverman. He's had a bit of a crisis in his shop today, and we're going to have to do a rain check for him. I'll try to get an email update and include that in my notes as I send those out. Rebecca, we've got some time for you. I think 15 minutes or 10 minutes you wanted to make sure we had a chance to talk about the 2020 strategy updates and how those might work into the milestone report. And you've got a request for any information, presentations, and so on for the team, right? And then at that point, we'll wrap up the normal subcommittee agenda at 12:20, and then we're going to shift gears into our BMP discussion. I think we should have 25 or 30 minutes, that maybe a little bit more depending on how this works, just for our working group to continue to work through the BMP list that we've got, and we'll have Bonnie Laws and I facilitating that section at for the last 30 minutes of our meeting today. Any questions on the agenda?
Brian, I had one just seeing the Google site at the top there. If that is being used as sort of the home base and for resources, I don't see that like our meeting agendas and our especially notes are posted to that. Is it possible for that for all things in this group and including the BMP notes taken to live on that site?
Yeah, we've been working with Ag to try to just shift responsibility so we can actually control that site, and that has been very difficult for legal reasons. So we continue to try to be able to own that. I've been distributing the materials that we have via email links that are on our server, like GPS server, so we continue to make sure to use those, and we'll maintain those until we can get actual control of that. That's taken much longer than we ever thought. So thanks, Jim.
Well, yeah, thanks for pursuing that. I think in the long run, if it's this site or even another venue, it's helpful for group reference, quite a large group, to be able to find those and review previous meeting notes type of thing. So thank you for pursuing that.
We agree. We'll continue to press, but it's been, it's come down to permissions and legal control of that site. So that's where we're trying to work through. It's traditionally been completely within the purview of the state of Colorado. That's the main issue. So. All right. So I will move through. We have one discussion, as I touched on this last time, and just want to make sure that each time we meet, that we're aware of kind of the time-sensitive nature of the work we're doing here, that we each time we meet and in our working group meetings between these, that we make progress in a way that we can say we're moving towards an end state, right? That we're able to clarify what those open issues are, what's happening. I can report that our contract, GPS contract, has been extended for another year. So we'll continue to be able to support and facilitate these meetings through next summer. And that's going to allow us to really focus on those open deliverables that we've identified, in particular, the best management practice inventory. So that's, again, one of the reasons we're devoting the last quarter of this agenda to that topic. The goal would be to have that complete by this time next year and be able to work through that with whatever research we have available in a way that is useful to people and be able to share that. Remember, in the meantime, it's a working document and a working process, so we're not releasing those to the broader public, rather allowing this group to work through and make some of those decisions and discussions as to what is something that we would want to be released and be representative of a best management practice. Any thoughts on the end state for the committee as we work through all of this? Okay, well, we'll continue to address that as we move through it. I appreciate the support we're getting from the Department of Public Health and Environment and the Department of Agriculture to fund and support this work here that we continue to pursue. And we want to make sure that we are accountable and making progress and sharing that throughout the year to make sure all those stakeholders are updated. With that, and we're a little bit early here, Jim, if you don't mind, we can jump into to our first topic.
Sure thing. Yeah, just a quick update on the contingency plan, or the addendum rather, to remove the contingency plan. We anticipated having all MOU agency signatures by now to approve that addendum. However, there's been delays in getting this in front of the EPA Region 8 director. In the interim, Darla Seidels, the Rocky Mountain National Park superintendent, retired, so we're there in the process of getting a new superintendent who has been named as Gary Ingram. He's coming in from Cumberland Island National Seashore. So Gary should, it's my understanding, should arrive at the park this month or next month, and we'll be getting him up to speed to again get his approval for that addendum concurrent with the EPA efforts. And so we do anticipate, I guess for the purpose of this group, we anticipate success in getting this, the addendum signed off on to remove the contingency plan, which will then be reflected in the milestone report. And as so all of the, the content that this group has reviewed and such remains the same. It's just a matter of getting those the MOU agency signatures. Does that make sense? Or are there any questions or additions from the other agency reps? If not, Brian, if we're ready, we can maybe move on to Christie's data update, or up to you.
Yeah, Jim, maybe I'm not sure if you purposely avoided this. Do you have an ETA for that, or is it just a matter of trying to get all of the principals in there and their reviews, and that's not knowable at this point? That may be the case.
I would, if Rebecca Perrin's on the line, I might kick it to her to chime in on timing.
I can get it all to work. I don't know if we necessarily have a specific answer right now. Our manager has been our regional administrator has been traveling pretty significantly this summer, so we are hoping to get on her calendar sometime in late August or early September. But that's unfortunately that's kind of par for the course for us as a region where people travel quite a bit in the summer. So I guess that's our update on that.
Understand. Yep, thanks. All right, let's go with Christy.
Sure. I can see that Kirsten King just joined the Teams, so if somebody wants to reach out to her and let her know that we're over here. Brian, I'd love to share my screen if I could.
Yeah.
Does that mean you have to stop sharing? Okay. Let's see here. Can you all see that, the graph, the glide path?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, this is nothing new. I think you guys have all seen this before, but just wanted to share it again. So the 2021 data summary has been drafted and it's undergoing internal review right now. Once that is done, we'll have it reviewed by the MOU agencies and hopefully get that published in the next month or two. You can see that in 2021, we did have quite a spike again in nitrogen deposition at the park, which resulted in the 5-year average being elevated again. We are working with Christy Gebhardt, who is running back trajectories and looking at meteorology and other things to help us explain why we saw that spike that was similar to the spike that we saw in 2013. If you remember in 2013, the meteorology showed more than average transport from eastern Colorado. And so that's kind of what we're looking at as a first cut to see if those meteorological patterns were similar to 2013. We do have a preliminary number for 2022. That deposition value is 2.4 kilograms. So back down in 2022, it was a lower precip year as well. And that results in a 5-year average of 2.78. So we're going to see the 5-year average drop just a little bit in 2022, but compared to the milestone, we're still going to be above that milestone in 2022. Data completeness for 22 was very good. So we'll still have this 2.4 number is from NADP. We'll still have Brett run his model to fill in for missing data that we've been doing. So it definitely could change from 2.4, but that's our forecast at this time. I think I talked last time about budget and monitoring sites, and the NPS has, we're dealing with some pretty severe shortfalls in our budget moving forward. We are facing closing sites and are discontinuing measurements at sites all across the country. But just wanted to let folks know that even though we're dealing with that, and our partners at EPA are dealing with that too, this project is obviously a very high priority for us, and we will continue to keep these monitoring sites going, but are currently looking for partners in any way, shape, or form. Specifics on the Loch Vale site, as you all know, Jill Barron will be retiring, and we have funding secured for the Loch Vale site through 2024, but we've been meeting to figure out what is the long-term monitoring for that site, funding for that site, and what does that look like. Shout out to CDPHE for picking up the funding for the Pawnee NADP site. So that definitely helps where we can. And I think that's all I have. If anybody has any questions.
Yeah, we have a question from Bonnie.
Yeah, I was curious what it costs to operate the Loch Vale site annually, and then also the funding through 2024. Does that go through like EPA year, calendar year? When is that?
I believe it's fiscal year 2024. So that would put us into, let's see. So that would put us into through September of 2025. But I should confirm that, Bonnie. The analytical cost of an NADP site is really low. It's only about $6,000 a year. So like for the Pawnee site, with state of Colorado picking that up, that's about the cost to have that site samples analyzed and data reported through the website and such. The problem with Loch Vale is that it is so labor intensive, taking up a full day of personnel time, that is the expensive piece of running Loch Vale. So it's quite a bit higher. We don't, the range of what you pay a person can vary greatly. So we don't have like a real cost for the whole site at this time. It would depend on who we ended up getting to do that. The park has expressed that they do not have the staff to commit to that every Tuesday. But so we are looking into other routes of, hiring a local contractor potentially to collect that sample.
Thanks, Christy.
Yeah,
Sure.
I just wanted to chime in. I mean, these are our struggles to work through, and the data, continuing to collect data at Loch Vale is a priority. Given the nature of this project, and it's the primary station for this project, of course. And Christy, you dropped the graph as I was.
Oh, did you
talking to
I can't see you when I've got the graph up. So
just to mention, we're still like on time here, but those that are like the numbers, you can see apparently 2017 is going to drop off for that 5-year rolling average. So if Christy mentioned a 2.4, well, that's preliminary. It still needs to go through the data substitution thing, but even if it's if it's in that area, maybe it pushes it above 2.5 something, it's gonna, appears to me it'll drop, given that 2017, that medium spike year, that 5-year rolling average in 2021 should drop down a bit. So just to give you just eyeball of where that data is likely to go, something that we're going to be analyzing completely in the upcoming 2022 milestone report that Megan's going to speak to, I think, next, about timing and so forth.
Thanks, Jim.
That was it. Thank you.
Justin, question?
Yes, looking at this chart, well, let me back up before I do that. If the Lockville site does not get funded, or funding is not found, or resources to continue that site, where do we see collecting data from, and then how do we correlate that data to Lockville, if Lockville is what we've been using all this time?
Yeah, Justin, I think the answer is that we won't let Lockville go away. We would love to have support. We're talking to our partners at USGS, since it's been historically funded by USGS. So we're hopeful that we find partners in that. But I think the short answer for now is that we will find a way. It will likely be at the expense of monitoring sites in other parts of the country.
Okay.
So they're tough decisions. We still, continue to talk with the park about an alternative site, which we've discussed for many years. We looked at that Bear Lake site that was much closer, and so it'd be more accessible, and then less time is being spent traveling to and from the site. But there was compliance that would have to be done in order to install equipment at that different site. And then we would have to run both sites for a while to see how they do compare. And given that we're having trouble finding funding and staff to operate one site, doing two sites in the near future is even harder to think about. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and just to mention quickly, Justin, your question is right on point. All right, so regardless of this near-term getting funding to continue it issue, I think the topic of an additional or alternate site up there at Bear Lake is something that we may revisit with the new superintendent to have potentially those years of correlation and understand where to go from here. So we're proceeding adaptively in the near term. We're looking to prop and secure the monitoring at Lockville to get past this hump.
Okay, and then Christy, I had one more quick question. If you throw your graph back up again, I'm sorry. So you talked about they're doing some back trajectories because we had a high year in 22 there, or 21. And we did that in like 17, and I think it was 13 was the other high years. But I'd never thought much about it until I was looking at this chart. Look at like, is that 18 or 19? Usually our high years fall with high precipitation. Makes sense, more precipitation, more deposition. But looking at 19, it looks like there was a decent spread between precipitation and deposition. Do we ever go back and do back trajectories on those years that look like we did something right and try to figure out, okay, what's the difference between that year and when we had high precipitation deposition?
That's a really good point. And I don't think we have, Justin. I think it's definitely worth doing, to find out the differences between the low and the high years. Yeah.
That's just the first time it stuck out to me that the precipitation was noticeably higher than deposition. And it might be worth looking at that year and just see if we can teach anything out of that.
Yeah. I will talk to Christy Gebhardt about that and see what we can do.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, and of course, precipitation times concentration equals the deposition. So that, in general terms, it would be for the 2019, it would have been, it's like explained just by the math, is lower concentrations. But something that, Christy Gebhardt and others in running their back trajectories looks for, they look for meaning. She looks for meaningful explanations for these spikes, and something we're gonna do again for 2021.
Right, assuming the concentration, well, the concentrations had to be lower in 19 with the higher deposition, with the higher precipitation
Yeah.
to lead the lower deposition. So understanding where our winds carried things in 19 may help us to lead to understanding where lower concentrations come from versus higher, things like that.
Right.
Indeed.
It'd be great if the back trajectories, you know, it would make sense if they showed that more transport came from the west, where there's, you know, in general cleaner air coming in, right? But to have that balance, looking at the high and looking at the lower.
Great. Any last questions before we let Christy finally retire the slide for the moment?
Going, gone.
Great discussion. Thanks everyone for the questions. That's really, really helpful.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, that was
All right.
insightful.
Megan, we've got a little time here. Provide an update on our plans for the AQCC meeting. On what's on your mind?
All right, give me just one sec. Hey everybody, Megan McCarthy from CDPHE. I'm going to provide a quick update on where the group is and the MOU agencies are with the milestone report and what we're thinking for the timing around that, and then how that kind of influences the October commission meeting. So the team of agencies are currently in drafting mode for the milestone report, you know, breaking up the sections, updating data, and then we have a goal of kind of by the end of August, possibly early fall, pulling in all of the sections and finalizing those into a draft and essentially sending it through like a reviewing and proofing phase, sending it to initial agency review by October is our estimated timeline. And then giving stakeholders, the key stakeholders we've been working with, including the subcommittee, a chance to review that draft before it goes out to finalization and public comment. We're thinking kind of end of October 2023, and then shooting for publication in January 24. That's our current timeline that we're on. And then that would tee us up for the presentation of the milestone report update to the commission in February. They have us on their calendar currently for the February meeting. And give me just a second. I'm going to fly through so I can actually tell you what those dates are so everyone can jot them down. It would be probably the 15th, I would think, depending on what else is on the calendar for that month. As we get closer, that could move, but the meetings are typically the Thursday and Friday of the third Thursday and Friday of the month. So that puts us around the 15th of February. So hold on, pull back up the schedule. So there's a lot to be done in that amount of time, and it's really go time for the report. So in light of kind of that timeline and everything we're pulling together for the report, we've worked with the commission and decided that it was really best, both based on the commission schedule in the fall, which is loaded, and the longer milestone report update that we have coming in February, to really kind of forego the October update and focus on the longer report presentation instead of having those so close together and kind of being rushed and having to focus resources on a short update in October when we're really just gearing up for this larger presentation. So that'll be noted. I do think it's pertinent to still set our sights on the February meeting, assuring that we continue discussion around the role that the subcommittee wants to play in the presentation itself. And then in addition to that, any parts of the milestone report that we could use this group's support on. And kind of the goals around the presentation, the messaging there, and then also any contribution to the milestone report that you all would want to make. So that is the update on the October commission meeting. The update is it's not happening, but we're really in full swing towards the February larger milestone update at this time.
Yeah, questions for Megan. Zach?
Good morning, guys. I don't know what's wrong with my camera. My computer's been upset with me ever since Microsoft Teams tried to take over this meeting.
That's
So,
right.
Megan, question being, I understand that the issue with the October meeting, has there been any other discussions around getting an agricultural rep in that presentation, and who or how we would go about choosing that person and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we totally welcome you all to do. I think it would add a lot of value, and the perspective is a really important piece of this project. So I think that having a pointed discussion around kind of the goals, first of all, is somebody from the group willing to come and present and able to during that time? And if so, kind of what you all would like to share to the commission, efforts around best management practices, the success of the subcommittee, and kind of the key pieces where you touch the project. So we would work together to make sure that you have space to do that.
Yeah, I would certainly welcome getting a chance to see your talking points or your presentation prior to, but and helping however we can there, and then additionally making sure that we get someone on that presentation panel from the industry to talk specifically about those details you mentioned. It was apparent in the last one that they weren't really familiar with the industry and the industry's contributions to this project and exactly where we are in the direction that we're headed. So it was more than obvious we need to bring in somebody that's an expert on that subject matter side to complement what you all present.
Yeah, we'd be excited to work with you on that. Thinking timing, let me circle up with the agencies and see kind of what, if we have an ask, and what our ask is around, first of all, any contribution to the milestone report, or helping pull together information around the topics that I just mentioned, whether it's, actually authoring language or reviewing a draft that we put together. I think it would be important to get your eyes on it. So thinking about the timing for that, probably coming up in the next couple months, but that can parallel the discussion of kind of who that point person is, and probably would be similar or the same as the person that presents at the commission meeting in February. So those two conversations can be aligned.
Great, thank you.
And Zach, I just want to second that interest and benefit in involving you guys in the presentation. In the past, it's been myself and Megan co-presenting. We as you saw last time, we got questions about that the industry could better answer. And so having you guys at the table will help us achieve that. So it's a matter of that coordination and timing, but the willingness and invitation is there.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate you guys being willing to help us coordinate so that we can make that happen and come to fruition.
Bonnie?
I do think I volunteered at a previous meeting.
Yep.
Not that I want to bring that back up again, because maybe I'm better off not, but so I'm still interested. And I will say that a group of us has been working with Rebecca Perrin on the ag section, and we're working on getting her information, and whether it's, we write it up or she writes it up. We have that going.
Cool.
So it's in the works. And then I guess myself and Julie McCaleb and a couple other folks might be point people to take it back to CLA to get other industry perspectives and buy-in on that, but that has started.
Okay, that's awesome. Then maybe we kind of pin the conversation around the presentation until the fall. Maybe at our next meeting, Brian, that could be an agenda item to set a date for that, because that then we'll have moved a lot more on the report and be closer to February.
Sure. All right.
Thanks, buddy. Sorry, I wasn't aware of that current ongoing collaboration with that piece.
We've at least, it's got kickstarted, so we're
cool. It's on the radar. That's good. That's good.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Thanks, Bonnie. Jim?
And just quickly, Brian, before we move on from this agency section of the meeting, if you will, I had made the suggestion our previous meeting for us to update the fact sheets, the agricultural fact sheets for this project. There's 3 of them on the ag Google site, biosolids, composters, and then a general one. And I don't know the process to get there, if we like sort of need concurrence by the larger group and potentially for like the BMP group to work on. So I throw that out there to I don't want to add an additional item here, but if that warrants a brief discussion and interest and willingness to do so.
I would say that's probably a good question for the BMP work group as we get through building our database and move from there. We can look at whether we update those or whether we add new ones, but I think it'd probably be a good question for that BMP group.
Sounds good. So we'll circle back on that if we got time at the latter part of this meeting. Thank you.
Right. I agree. Thanks, Jim. All right. That moves us forward in the agenda to the early warning system. Dr. Schumacher, you there?
I am. Do you
Welcome.
want me to, I can go ahead and share here, or at least try to.
Yeah, go ahead. You should have permissions.
Cool. Good.
There
So
you
well, there's okay. Let me just, well, I don't know. Can you, what are you seeing now? Are you seeing?
We're seeing your title slide. You look good.
Got it. Okay. Still?
Yep.
Okay. So so I missed the May meeting. I thought I was going to be on, and then I was out in Eastern Colorado where there wasn't much internet. So most of these slides I sent around after that meeting. So I'm going to go pretty quickly through this because most of the material is the same, but I will highlight a couple of things on, kind of recent updates on this. So I think most everybody in this group is kind of familiar with the early warning system at this point. The idea of kind of making predictions of periods when there's going to be upslope flow from the east into Rocky Mountain National Park, and using weather prediction models to kind of with a kind of simple framework to get at that. So just as this was a newish or updated analysis, I guess, that I shared in the slides last time. But it's kind of worth pointing out, I think, in light of the questions earlier, like the question Justin raised about 2019 and from what Christy shared. So this is just kind of when during the year we tend to get high deposition. So basically what this is showing is over that whole record of now I can't remember how many years are in the record, but quite a few years, taking the top 10% of weeks of deposition at both Beaver Meadows and Lock Vale and looking at the seasonality of that. And so you can see there's a big seasonality with the peaks happening in April and May, and then July and August, with kind of a drop off in June, which is sort of interesting, but I guess the mountains do tend to dry out in June, and that's probably why. And it's pretty similar at Lock Vale with a bit of a shift towards the spring being favored over the summer there, but it's the same month where most of the action is happening, April, May, and then July, August, a bit of March and September, and then not much in the fall and winter. So, and then if you kind of, this is the whole reason I think behind the early warning system is, for example, the top 10% of weeks cause 30+% of the deposition. So the idea is that you, if you can predict those weeks and potentially reduce emissions during those time periods, it could make a big difference in the overall numbers. And then this is a time series of those same weeks, basically. Okay, so the data set goes back to the early 80s, looking at what years those high deposition weeks happened in. So we see at Beaver Meadows, 2013 really shows up. Lock Vale similarly, 2001, and then there's 2021 as Jim and Christy were showing earlier, as a year with a lot of deposition. That was an extremely wet spring. We had that huge snowstorm in March, and then May was super wet. So that I think was what was driving that quite a bit. Last year, 2022 was was very low. And so that aligns also with, in terms of the, high deposition weeks, that aligns well with what Jim showed of the kind of reduction in deposition last year. This is just a map showing the counties that the warnings have been issued for, going back to when the EWS started in 2014. So you can see most of the time we're only issuing warnings for the counties that are closest to the park. Larimer, Weld, Boulder, Adams and Morgan and Broomfield, Denver get in there a good bit of the time, but very rarely for the counties like in the far eastern tier of counties, and it's very rarely down into towards southeastern Colorado. So this kind of leads in then to the update for this year. As those of us, at least, on the Front Range and Eastern Plains are well acquainted with, it's been an extremely wet spring and summer. And accordingly, we've issued a lot of warnings this year. So this is for Weld County. It looks the same for Larimer. It's the most warnings we've issued in a year since the system started. And that's because we've been in this persistent wet pattern through this spring and summer. And so this is the map of just from this year, 2023, of 17 warnings in Larimer, Weld, and Boulder for mostly May, June, July period. And then I just throw this in to kind of show how wet it's been. So this is May, June, and July, where May, June, and July ranked in terms of total precipitation with respect to the whole historical record. So much of eastern Colorado had its wettest May, June, July on record. But this also gets at some of these challenges that I'll just touch on at the end in just a second of forecasting for Lock Vale, in that I think we'll have to see how the numbers turn out when all the data comes in. But I suspect that it will probably be one of the wettest years that's ever been observed at Beaver Meadows. But I'm not sure if it will at Lock Vale at that slightly higher elevation, because you can even see on this map like the very tight gradient in how wet it's been at the slightly lower elevations versus the really high elevations. So we'll have to see how the data comes out for 23, but I suspect that probably the deposition is going to be high just because the precipitation has been so high. But we'll have to wait and see how that shakes out. And this, I won't go through the details here, but basically the idea is that, and then we've seen this over the history of the system, is that we're quite good at forecasting when there's a lot of deposition at Beaver Meadows. Around half of the time, we get those right, but not at Lock Vale. And so it's only like a quarter of the time that there's high deposition is the forecast right up there. The sources of the sources of the emissions that come to Lock Vale, I think, are more varied. The weather systems that give heavy rain, even just those few miles apart within the park, the elevation difference is pretty important. So this is kind of continues to be where we're at. So this is the same summary I've shown a bunch of times probably to this group, but what's good is the system's pretty cheap. It's up and running. It kind of, we monitor it with a couple of us to only send out warnings, not in a fully automated fashion, but the automated part is pretty cheap and things are pretty simple, and it does a pretty good job at highlighting the events 1 to 3 days in advance, especially in the spring and especially at Beaver Meadows. The downside is it's a simple system. We're not explicitly predicting deposition. We're just kind of trying to back it out from other weather parameters. The work that Christy mentioned is a lot more sophisticated in terms of figuring out the sources and whatnot. And we're not quite at the point where we're doing much beyond 3 days, farther out in advance, but we want to do that in the future, and doesn't always do well for Lock Vale, as I mentioned. And one last thing, and it's hard to forecast thunderstorms in the summer, just generally. So that's part of the issue as well. So I just wanted to make one quick add since we were talking about meetings there, and it's very last minute now. I think I included most folks in this, or at least some folks in this group when we were sending out email blasts about this. So it's short notice because it's next week. But if anybody in this group wants to come to our kind of meeting to bring together climate services, data providers, data users down at the Spur campus in Denver. I know it's a busy time of year, but on the website, it says the registration final deadline was yesterday, but if anybody here wants to still sign up, we've still got some room. So feel free to do that. So that's probably more time than I was supposed to take already, but I will stop there.
Yeah, really wonderful update. Thank you so much. Great detail on the map too, and the discussion of the difference between Beaver and Lockvale. I found that really helpful. Any questions? Christy?
Let's see, trying to turn on the video. Yeah, Russ, thank you. Are you, is it still part of the early warning system that we're collecting data on what changes were made, or I'm also remembering maybe reasons for why changes weren't instituted?
Yeah, so we do have that data. It comes, producers can respond through the website when they get the warnings and respond to that. Our group isn't really positioned to know quite what to do with that data, but I think Zach and CLA have access to that as well, and might have a better sense of what more we might learn from that data set. I have not looked into that in a while, and I haven't looked at how many people have been responding lately.
Okay.
But it is still set up, it's still there. Yeah.
Still on this.
Go ahead, Zach.
I just walked into Brittany's office. Sorry. I was like, where's that spreadsheet? I don't have anything conclusive that's changed significantly since last year when we looked at it the last time. It's mostly the same patrons, I guess is the best way to put that, that we still have on there.
Okay.
Thanks, Zach. Jim?
I could use a refresher on what that said, maybe next time or next report out on the early warning system. That would be great.
Yeah, sure, Christy, if you want to shoot Russ and I a direct email, happy to try to help facilitate that.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
I have a question for Russ, but just a response to that, like early warning system data. I think that is an important part, quantifying, qualifying, even in just an aggregate form, to telling agricultural's story in the milestone report. So we're hoping to see the details of that appear as you're working with Rebecca on your for your sections. Just a question for Russ is the on the slides that talk about 28% and 43% for Lockvale and Beaver Meadows respectively for like predicting the high deposition events. Is it is that percent more for predicting precipitation at all at these sites, or is that what you're meaning for high deposition events?
I mean, that I was looking at it in terms of the high deposition events, but right, that the forecasting the precipitation is a big part of it for sure. And I think the reason that it's easy is quite a bit easier in a sense for Beaver Meadows is there generally is that more direct connection of there's upslope flow from the plains, it's raining in the park, or it's raining at maybe the slightly lower elevations in the park, and that part is pretty predictable. I think it's just then it's the making that connection of the air coming from the eastern plains getting all the way up to Lockvale, and when it's precipitating up there it's not that the air isn't getting from the eastern plains up there. I think it's just a little bit more, those situations are maybe a little bit more complicated. And similarly, I think there are cases where there may be emissions coming from the other direction, from the west or wherever in the winter, or well, maybe not as much in the winter because we don't see high deposition that much. But maybe in other types of storms where Lockvale gets a bunch of precip, it's high deposition, but maybe that air was not coming from the east, and that's where the kind of stuff that Christy is working on may inform
Sure.
that a little better.
Yeah, and the higher percentage for Beaver Meadows isn't surprising to your point. But if I understood, these maybe less than high deposition events, if you roll that into, predicting that overlapping the warnings, that percentage may be higher for Lockvale. So,
Yeah. Okay. And now we've got most of that data in a pretty easy to parse format. So if you wanted to look at slightly less high, less extreme weeks or whatever, it's not too hard to do that.
Sure. Thank you.
Let's see, let's do one more quick question. We got a bunch of other topics. Bonnie, what do you got?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell you that you're very good at predicting when it's going to rain this year. So every time I get an upslope warning, usually means that we're about to get dumped on.
Well, that's been sort of easy this year because it's just been predict a lot of rain, and it turns out to be right.
And I guess I was curious if it also rains, on the eastern plains or the Front Range before going up to Lockvale. Does that wash anything out? Does that change the equation at all? Versus where you maybe have that upslope where we don't get precip here on the Front Range, and it still makes its way up to the park.
Yep. No, I think you're totally right, and I think the sort of respective timing of that makes a huge difference in the actual emissions and transport and deposition and all that. I think we're probably not at in the spring storms, it's maybe a little easier, but summer thunderstorms, is it going to start raining in Greeley before it starts raining in the park is a hard thing to forecast. But yeah, I think you're exactly right, Bonnie, is that if you get a bunch of rain on the farm or whatever first, then it's going to wash that air out, and the deposition is going to happen there locally rather than getting transported up to the park. So that would be I think a really interesting, and like Jeff Colliff's group and others, I think have looked at that a little bit, maybe Jay Ham, but we sort of try to account for that in the early warning system, but I wouldn't say we incorporate that in a very sophisticated way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yep.
All right. Thanks so much, Russ. We'll get your slides updated.
Yep.
If you can send those to me, I'll get those in the notes for everyone to review. Really good.
Will do.
All right. Let's see. Dr. Sarah Place from CU Ag Next. We're a little late, but I want to let you know Dr. Alverman is out, so we do have time here till 12:15 if you want to go ahead, Dr. Place.
Sounds great. Try to be quick too, give you guys a little bit of time back since I know you want to do some discussion here at the end. But so just want to kind of introduce CSU Ag Next for those on the call that aren't familiar with what the group is and the research that we do, especially that's relevant to this discussion. But a little bit of an overview. CSU Ag Next is a group at Colorado State, a research collaborative that cuts across multiple departments that's really focused on sustainable animal ag. And so you can see our vision and mission here on the slide. We're really focused on solutions that can be scalable and making sure that we're true to land grant mission and actually working with industry to find those solutions that work for Colorado and beyond. And when we think about sustainability, a big part of that is, of course, the environment, but we also have folks that cut across other domains of sustainability. So just a bit of an overview of who is Ag Next. These folks are our faculty and staff. That's a current iteration. We keep adding folks, but our director is Dr. Kim Stackhouse Lawson. She's housed in animal sciences, as am I, a professor of feedlot systems. We have another feedlot systems specialist, Dr. Carvalho, a dairy systems specialist, and a couple ag economists on the team, and a couple modelers on our team. And a communications staff. So again, just put all these folks up here just to know that this is, again, a very interdisciplinary team that's focused on environmental and broader than environmental issues when it comes to sustainability in animal ag. As I mentioned, we're a big believer in being very true to the land grant mission. As a part of that, we have an industry innovation working group that meets with us every 6 months. So we give them an update. They provide us an update on what their priorities are, how well we're meeting their vision and their needs in this space. So some familiar faces on this group. We also engage with others such as CLA during these meetings to make sure that we're getting a broad cross-section of Colorado agriculture from a standpoint of all the way from cattle production to even retailers, right, in their perspective, and NGOs in their perspective on these groups. And then basically, as with all things at universities, none of this work would happen without actual graduate students. And so this is just an overview of our current list of students that are affiliated with AgNext in terms of undergrads, but also graduate students, some of which are graduating and rotating out of the program this year. So that overview of who we are, again, we're focused on sustainable animal agriculture, an interdisciplinary approach. We have a large team. Some of the facilities we have are very unique, and honestly, these are only in existence because of that partnership with industry. So a little bit of an overview here. There's a lot on the slide, but basically we have our what we call our climate smart research facility, and that is contains about $1.3 million worth of donated equipment from the cattle industry, from Colorado agriculture, including Five Rivers, Farm Credit, Midwest PMS have generously donated some of this equipment. So to kind of walk through what we're looking at here, our research facility is located at the RDEC experiment station north of Fort Collins. So over here on the left, we just have an overview of the cattle feeding facility and then the grazing pivot that is there. That's about a 200-acre pasture system under irrigation that we can do more management intensive grazing experiments on. Each one of these pens over here called the Climate Smart Research Pens houses some unique equipment that I'll kind of highlight on the next few slides, but basically each pen allows us to measure methane emissions, CO2 emissions, hydrogen gas, oxygen consumption on individual animals, up to 50 animals per pen. We can also measure individual feed intake and body weight gain. And each of these pens also, as I'll kind of highlight on the next slide, can act as its own unit for mass balance research. And that's what's really relevant when we talk about the nitrogen deposition, right? And our ability to look at gaseous loss of nitrogen from cattle systems and differences in interventions that we can do from a best management plan perspective there. So again, also have grazing research. So our goal is to make sure that we can cover the entire cattle system and be able to look at methane emissions and obviously climate change issues, right? Greenhouse gas emissions, but also nitrogen use efficiency and ways to impact that. So for mass balance, we're actually doing our first experiment with using this capability in these pens now. And as you can see, these critters here, we have some Boss Indicus type cattle in there now. We're basically doing a comparison of two different breeds. So Boss Indicus animals and Angus type animals, Black Angus animals, and two different production systems. And so this is relevant as well to this group and thinking about best management practices. So those production systems account for not using any of the feeding and other growth promoting technologies in the cattle industry versus using basically everything that's available. So that would be things like feed additives like ionophores that can moderate feed intake of the animals so they don't eat as much for every unit of body weight gain, growth implants that can help increase nitrogen retention in the animal, and beta agonists that can be fed at the end of the feeding period to also increase nitrogen retention. So we're super interested in looking at that comparison of basically all those different technologies available by different breed versus none of those technologies. We're going to repeat this experiment over seasons as well. So kind of this discussion about seasonality, we'll be able to pick up any differences there in terms of aggregate gaseous losses. So this research, we always kind of say it's a little bit of cowboy science, right? It's pretty basic, right? We're not actually measuring the ammonia emissions or any other reactive nitrogen emissions from the pen surface. What we're basically doing is saying we know exactly how much nitrogen and inputs went into the pen based on what we're feeding the animals. We know what leaves in terms of the animal's body mass, and we clean the pens and actually weigh all the remaining, mostly organic nitrogen, right, that's there in the manure. And the difference, of course, is what's lost the atmosphere. So again, that research, hopefully we'll be able to provide an update to this group as we get these results, and let you guys know what we find from that standpoint of those kind of extremes comparisons. So a lot of our focus, though, is on enteric methane emissions. So we use what are called green feed machines to actually do this type of work. So again, now we're kind of shifting from nitrogen to carbon, right, from a focus standpoint. But how these machines work is they're basically a feeder, a bait feeder that we have in the feed alley in our system. And these individual animals can come up to this feeder. They can visit up to 6 times a day. They have an RFID tag in their left ear that indicates if that animal is available to be fed. A little bit of feed drops, keeps the animal's head in this system. Air is pulled around the animal's head. Subsample goes to a gas analyzer to actually measure methane emissions and all those other gases that I mentioned, right? So that's a very simple way to put it, but basically we just need to know the concentration of these gases in the background. We need to know the airflow rate through the system. We need to know the concentrations the animals are exhaling out their mouths, right? So one, just to know that most of the methane comes from the animal's mouth. And so that's why we use these systems. We don't really necessarily, we're not missing much by not getting the whole animal and their gas exchange. So a little bit of data and kind of preliminary stuff that we've found so far, what we've observed. So this is just what this facility looks like. Each one of these green bins is basically what we call a smart feed unit. It's a feed bin that's sitting on load cells. It's continuously weighed. So just like with the green feed unit where the animal's RFID identifies them, we identify that animal when they stick their head into the unit. So we know exactly how much they eat, all the meals that they consume, and we know how much feed they're consuming, right? And then these are the green feed machines and the setup in these pens. So the data I'll present here was collected by Maya Swenson, who's now a master's student with AgNext. And again, some of the demographics here, these are CSU-owned cattle that were younger animals fed a backgrounding diet. And we were just interested in just characterizing their emissions. So one thing to know, as with a lot of things in biology, right, it's not a single number doesn't represent things, right? And we see this with cattle as well in terms of methane emissions. So what we're looking at here is methane emissions in grams per head per day on the y-axis. We're looking at bulls, heifers, and steers over this whole November to January timeframe that we had these animals in this facility. And then these hours represent from midnight to midnight all the observations that we're seeing from these animals, just expressing them over a 24-hour time frame. So the point of this is just to show you, it's pretty clear when these animals got fed, right? Around 7 a.m. every single day, when we have a little bit of a gap in these dots. So each one of these dots is an observation from these animals. So these animals are being fed in the green bins. They're not going to the snack machine, basically the green feed, to actually get their methane emissions measured. So there's less methane observations at that time. But you'll also note this pretty distinct rise in methane emissions when they get fed. So these animals were only fed once per day, right? They had feed available throughout the day, but they eat that big meal at the beginning of their day, and a lot of methane gets generated, right? So cattle are basically a fermentation unit, right? So we put a lot of material in there and we get a lot of gas that comes out right after that meal. So to that end, methane emissions, this is not, I kind of joke, this is not rocket science, right? Or something that's really a groundbreaking finding, but methane emissions are highly correlated to feed intake, right? Just like any sort of nutrient excretion from the animal, methane is the same in terms of if you put more into the animal, you're going to get more out, right? It depends on the diet and everything else, but methane emissions is pretty strongly correlated with feed intake. And so this is just showing this again, methane emissions on the y-axis, dry matter intake on the x-axis, and that positive correlation for all 3 cattle types that we looked at in this data set. This highlights some of the complexity, right? As we want to mitigate methane emissions. For example, there's interest in genetic selection to reduce methane emissions from cattle. And one of the key things there is that we don't want to just select animals that emit less methane, right? Because these tend to be animals that eat more. And those animals that eat more tend to be larger. They tend to be more feed efficient. They tend to gain more body weight, right? So if we just select for less methane, we potentially cause negative implications, right, for cattle feeders, for the whole cattle industry in terms of less efficiency. So we don't want to do that, right? We want to be more sophisticated about it. So we can do things like control for body weight, control for feed intake, right? And try to find those animals that are outliers, if you will, animals that make less methane than we would expect. So that's what's going on here. This is just showing body weight expressed as kilograms on the y-axis. And then this residual value is just saying, correcting for body weight and feed intake, do these animals emit more or less methane than we would expect, right? So more negative values on this x-axis mean animals that emitted less than we would expect. Farther to the right, more positive values mean animals that emitted more than we would expect. And I've just pulled out two animals here that I've kind of highlighted on this graph just to highlight the variation that we see, right? And the stuff that does make you scratch your head a little bit, right? So we have one steer here, steer A, gaining roughly the same as steer B. He actually was eating slightly more feed, more total mixed ration, but he made 33% less methane, right? Despite being roughly, again, the same body weight, actually slightly heavier, right? So the differences there, right, are interesting, likely explained by different microbial populations within the animal's gut, could be different feeding behavior, all these type of things. They're all eating the exact same diet, right? It's another caveat I should throw out here, right? So these are the type of things that we're investigating and drilling down a little bit further into to understand. What's unique is right now in our facility, we have some of these animals that we measured back in November and January back in the facility. Right, so this is kind of the tail of this one little steer here, 2652. This is what he looked like back in November, right, when he was just a little guy. And these were his methane emissions at that time, right? So what we're looking at is methane in grams per day. Each one of these dots is one of those times where he stuck his head in the machine and we measured those emissions. And then we're going from November to January here when he was in that facility. So overall, his mean emissions at that time were 211 grams per head per day. Right, so he's eating a high forage diet, eating roughly 16, 17 pounds of feed dry matter a day. Now he's back in that facility this summer. He's eating a finishing diet, so he's eating a higher grain diet. He's eating roughly 23, 24 pounds of dry matter a day. Okay, so his intake is higher, and yet his methane emissions on average are only 140 grams. Right, so this is what we know very well from a standpoint of animal nutrition, is that as we feed a higher grain diet, as we do, right, in finishing operations, especially in northern Colorado, right, we're lowering methane emissions when we feed that higher grain diet as compared to high forage diets. That's partially why animals are more efficient, but again, we see this even within an individual animal over different life stages. Even though he's eating more, he's emitting less methane because he's more efficient. All right, so to kind of sum that up, again, this is more on the carbon side of things, but that's what we're interested in, is those efficiency opportunities, right, to improve the economics of production, but then also lower environmental impact or lower nutrient excretion in general, whether it's nitrogen compounds, carbon compounds, whatever it may be. Right? So just for methane, we kind of summarize what we work on in 4 different buckets, right? We're trying to make sure we get better baselines, make sure models that are used for, inventorying purposes and others are as accurate as we can get them. But then we're also interested in basically what goes into the animal and how we can feed them in different dietary feed additives to lower methane. We're interested in genetic selection and developing tools for genetic selection to lower methane emissions permanently from the cattle herd. And then also investigating more of the rumen microbiome relationships and understanding, are there things that we can target more directly within the rumen to lower methane in a economically feasible way. So with that, hopefully didn't take too much time, but thanks for your attention. If there's any time for questions, happy to take them. Or you can email me here if you have questions afterwards too.
Yeah, thanks so much, sir. Yeah, any questions from the team here? We've got a couple other topics we want to dive into, but I want to follow up. That was a lot of good material and comparison data. Yep.
In general, well, thank you for that presentation. Just I guess in general, what positive synergies do you see maybe between your research and this group's efforts to, lower and manage nitrogen emissions?
Yeah, so as we mentioned, right, some of those production technologies are positives in terms of both greenhouse gas mitigation and nitrogen use efficiency, basically, right? So anytime we can make feed efficiency or feed to gain more positive in terms of being more efficient, we tend to lower emissions per unit of production of both, right, reactive nitrogen compounds and methane, right? So I think that's our key focus. Sustainability can't only be summarized as efficiency, but in a lot of ways you got to have efficiency, right? And so that's a huge synergistic area for us, is just looking for those other ways to incrementally keep improving efficiency. And I think that's always the caveat, is this industry is already super efficient, right? So we're talking about shaving off little pieces of efficiency, because huge gains have already been made.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, if you don't mind sharing your email in those slides, I'll make sure they get included as a link for the notes.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, let's keep moving. We've got a lot to cover still. We did have a request, and I want to make sure we get some time here. Rebecca wanted to talk a little bit about strategy updates from the 2020 strategy. Rebecca.
Yeah, so first off, and I apologize, Brian, if this was on me, but when I see CDA, I think Colorado Department of Ag. And so I just wanted to be clear for this group that the 5-year strategy I'm referring to is actually this group's 5-year strategy for communication. So anyways, as Bonnie mentioned, and others have kind of mentioned, I'm working on drafting the sections of the milestone report, which address the efforts of agriculture, both this group and generally made during the 5-year milestone period. So that would be from 2018 through 2022. Just for a little bit of history for folks, the 2017 milestone report also had similar sections, and that report provided information on research, monitoring, outreach, the early warning system, tools that were available to producers to reduce emissions, and then what this group was planning to do for the next milestone period, which I will be writing a report on, right? It was looking future. That report also included a table that listed presentations made by various groups, completed interviews, related to AG's involvement with the media for this initiative. And I'm kind of looking to capture all of it, right? Or at least as much that you all think is most relevant for the efforts that have been made by this group and AG generally. So we definitely want to make sure it's accurate, complete. However, we also had a pandemic during the milestone period, right? So our best plans for maybe outreach for a couple years there got a little bit derailed. And so I'm looking for help from this group to provide me with any information on any outreach you might have done, either from prior to the pandemic, right, during this milestone period, or anything that maybe you did afterwards. Outreach could be, if you gave a presentation, if you were at a conference and you gave a presentation and you were talking about stuff related to the Rocky Mountain National Park Initiative, if you were talking to producers. So, what I'd be interested in there is the year and what the name of the group that you spoke to, or the name of the meeting. If you did any media, I'd be interested in, if you still have a copy of the article, I'd be interested in that. If not, if you could kind of tell me who you spoke to and when you spoke to them, right? And these things can be kind of emailed to me. I am working with a small group of folks, as Bonnie's and others have mentioned. I think what's probably going to end up happening because of the pandemic and some reduced outreach is we may be focusing more on what research this group has done, maybe the focus of this group, some of the BMP work that they've done, any monitoring efforts. And so that small group of folks is kind of helping me to pull some of that information together. If anybody in this larger group has interest in helping, just shoot me an email. I'd be happy to add you to that. And let's see, there was one other thing I wanted to flag, which is that there's also the other important thing to flag is that the milestone period and this group's 5-year strategy, they are not on the same 5-year track, right? So this group's strategic document for 5 years was completed in 2020. So I'm thinking that is covering, you know, the 5 years for that 5-year strategy started from 2020. And we lost some time in there because of the pandemic. So as a result, there's also a section of the report that talks about what this group plans to do or commit to for the next 5 years. You have a strategy that would cover the first 2 years of this next milestone period, so 23 and 24, but there's nothing currently in place for 25, 26, and 27. And so I'd like to kind of just get thoughts from the group as to, you know, if there's something in particular that they're interested in like committing to, or if we need to have more conversations about what that could look like. Brian, for your reference, probably at some point in 2024, there's going to need to be work done on what will the next 5-year strategy look like.
Right.
So that's kind of the space that I'm operating in right now. And I just want to stop and pause and maybe get any initial feedback from the group. And then if there's time, maybe there can be a little bit of a discussion in regards to how the 5-year strategic plan of this group, since it doesn't line up with the milestone report, like how you all want me to kind of articulate those gaps, that 3-year gap that isn't covered by anything that I can read this group has produced.
Right. Yeah. Let's open it up. What do you think, everyone? First of all, comb your records, right? Think about anything you can share to demonstrate the outreach that we've been working on over the last few years. It's really important to share that so we can get awareness of that and generate the credibility that the group has. What do you think about the broader strategy question from Rebecca?
Are you asking me or are you asking the group?
I was asking the group, just
Okay.
reiterating your ask.
I think part of the area where there's going to be some strength and an opportunity to really put forward a path and a plan that moves the needle reflects around both the project that we're not going to hear on, the CIG project, and what's going on with the BMP group, looking at trying to flesh out and improve not just the accuracy or increase the number of BMPs, but to be able to really identify and characterize and quantify gaps in ability to quantify, and where we can quantify to be able to put that where we're better able to assess what we're doing, why we would expect a good outcome from that. There's so much variability built into natural systems, especially one where not only is it rainfall dependent, but it's dependent on when that rain falls. And so I think having better understanding of what the BMPs do and what kind of impact they can have is going to be something that's going to add a lot of meaning to our plans going forward.
And it may be helpful for this group too. I'm sure folks maybe you're not looking at it at a daily basis, but the 5-year strategy that this group developed had kind of 3 main sections. There was monitoring, research, and outreach, right? If I look at the last milestone report and what we'll probably be creating for this milestone report, we're going to be focusing again on those 3 kind of major categories and trying to capture the work that's being done. So anyways, and I'd be happy to kind of help assist with some of that stuff. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to lead this group in the development of their 5-year strategy, but you know, I'd be happy to assist with that at some point moving forward.
I would say it's something that should be ag-led, and I think in general we're still working towards those 3 main goals.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how much we can project out what we're going to do beyond the fact that we're going to be still working on research, outreach, monitoring. So I guess I don't know how much more it needs. It's just kind of more that we're still always working towards those same goals. And we just kind of add things as we get them, which is not necessarily helpful for putting in the milestone report. But I think our efforts are oftentimes better spent in actually finding those projects and doing that work rather than sometimes spinning our wheels a little bit on trying to plan what that looks like. They kind of go hand in hand. So maybe it's that things get added to that as we find them, opportunities that arise, that kind of thing.
I mean, I can certainly write something up to that effect, Bonnie, like, you know, that the group, because I feel like, you know, it seems to me like where the BMP work and some of these other things are happening, that like sometime in 2024, you all be very ripe for figuring out exactly where this group wants to focus its energy. And it may shift compared to what is currently written in the existing 5-year strategy. And so I think for the milestone report, we could certainly write it to reflect that, right? Like, here's some of the efforts that are occurring in this monitoring and research space that started during this last milestone period that we anticipate to continue forward. The 5-year strategy, which will still have, which will still cover the first 2 years into the next milestone period, right? Would still be relevant. And so I can certainly write it up that way, but I did not want to assume anything. And I thought it was good to just touch base with the group and get your thoughts.
And
Yes.
I think,
Justin,
I think
go ahead.
sorry, Ryan. But just, I think it's appropriate to also recognize that the research efforts are likely to spawn the next level of research effort. But I think even more so, the outreach is going to be, as I think Rebecca, you just mentioned, is that there's a lot of things that are going to be ripe that are not quite ripe yet. And so as we learn more from research, as we learn more from the efforts of the BMP, I think that we'll see, if not a shift, we'll see a greater focus on outreach in those latter years.
Justin?
Yeah, Rebecca, I was just going to say something similar to what Dr. Shaw said. You know, between the research that Dr. Overman is doing and then the research that Dr. Sarah Place mentioned today with the nitrogen mass balance and technologies versus no technologies, I see us finally having some tangible, quantifiable numbers to do outreach with. You know, that's been the hard thing to this point is, hey, producers, we have these things that we think will help. We're not sure how much they'll help. We're pretty confident they will, but we don't know. And now that we see some of this research coming around between Dr. Overman and Dr. Place and Ag Next, that to me, that should guide our outreach. Then we have something that's easier to go out and sell to producers about, if you do this, we should expect this kind of reduction. So it's more of the same, but it's more of the same with better data, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Excellent.
All right. Well, like I said, if people can just you know, and I feel like I made this ask 5 years ago. And so there's probably a better way for us to be dealing with this moving forward. Like, you know, we talk about the website or gain access to folders. Like, at some point, there's probably a better way for us to like start capturing this stuff in real time so that we're not all having to comb back through our records for the past 5 years to find when we might have given a presentation or an interview or something along those lines. But I have hope that we'll get it dialed in before we do the next version of this milestone report in 5 years on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rebecca.
And that's it. That's all I had, unless anybody else had anything else for me. Just send me info. If you want to help me out, shoot me an email. Happy to have you be part of the group.
Yeah, just a quick thanks to all the entities working on this. I mean, it helps the agency milestone reports when we can reflect on a current ag strategy. So that work is not in vain. It helps to, and it also helps to tell ag's accurate story. I mean, just the sequencing here, ag section of the milestone report is like, as well as the agencies, all that information that's front and center, which will be captured for near future efforts in updating the ag's 5-year strategy is kind of the sequencing that I see. So just a quick thanks. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Rebecca. We'll make that clear in the notes. There's the ask and continue to reiterate that. All right. That leads us to the conclusion for most of the meeting today. If you're a member of our working group, you please stay on. We're going to dive right into the BMPs with Bonnie. Everyone else, this is an area that is pretty detailed, and we want to make sure that we have our small working group focused on this. So we'll give you a chance to check out. Notice I'll share out a recording of today's meeting and all links to the presentations that have been shared and our notes in a day or two. So thanks, everyone.
Hey, real quick, Brian, one last thought, as far as agenda items for
Sure.
next time, which I believe is November 2nd, it looks like it'll turn out to be. Dan Miller has been joining us the last few calls, and I'd really like to get him on the agenda to give a talk about the research that he's doing with ammonia measurements near agriculture. And I can follow up with you on that. And then also April Latham would be somebody to invite to give a talk to. So maybe the November agenda will allow for that, or we can space them out.
Absolutely.
But I think both of their research efforts are very applicable to this group.
Yeah, happy to have it. We don't have the agenda crafted yet, but make sure just give me an email with the topic and the estimated time frame, and I'll build out the the agenda before.
Okay.
I did want to make one comment before we lose everyone. I'll go ahead and extend into next year our first Thursday meeting, so you'll see some invitations going into February and May and so on of next year. I mentioned that at the top, but just make sure you'll see that invitation extension. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, so our working group will stay on. Yeah, this is the right team. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Yeah, this is tight. Bonnie, how are you thinking?
I suppose we start off with sharing the spreadsheet as we have it. And I believe it was sent out. I made a couple of changes after our meeting on the 7th of June. So, and I haven't changed anything since then. So we can start with that and pick up where we left off. Okay. Okay, and Brian, you might have to remind me what we made it through at the last meeting.
Right, we worked our way down. We're validating the rows at this point.
Yep. Okay, well, and I got a note in here that we reviewed the BMPs above.
Yep.
And then we were going to keep going through.
Yeah, 49 we'll pick up.
Okay. So we've got just kind of a general statement followed for our nutrient approach to nitrogen fertilizer management.
Yeah, this came into the inventory. Jim, you may have shared this one, if I'm right. The general right place, right time, that type of thing.
It was mentioned. Let's see, I'm just knocking out the cobwebs here.
Yep.
It was my request that I guess the previous version there was like the crops were BMPs were kind of minimized, but there was a request to look at that again, and I guess there was a conversation that then included these.